I was standing in my own front yard, coffee steaming in my hand, boots planted on the concrete my grandfather poured back in '67. She marches over, new neighbor, 18 months in, points straight at my chest.
You need to vacate this property right now.
No please, just that flat, entitled tone. This land? 32 years of my property taxes paid on time. Grandfather's fence posts still firm in the ground. Dad spent 2 summers building that workshop out back with his bare hands. And my late wife, gone 2 years now, her rose bushes are still blooming along the side gate, like they're quietly guarding the home she loved. She hasn't said a kind word to anyone on the street since she moved in. And today, she decided I didn't belong here. I didn't move, didn't speak, just let her words hang in the air. Because what happened next? She froze, completely. What would you have done? Drop it in the comments, and tell me your state or country. Let me tell you about the land first, because the land is the whole story. My name is Garrett Wolfson, 58 years old, retired Army Corps of Engineers, 22 years surveying land for the federal government, which is its own kind of irony given how this story ends. I live in Millhaven, Virginia, on a corner lot on Sycamore Bluff Road that my grandfather, Elmer Wolfson, bought in 1941 for $400 and a handshake. 83 years later, his name is still on the original deed in my fireproof box in the hall closet. The house is a 1940s craftsman bungalow, hardwood floors that creak in the same 3 spots they've always creaked, a front porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs, and out back, a detached workshop my father built the summer I turned 14, the summer he taught me what it meant to put your hands on something and make it last. That workshop is where I restore vintage tractors now. After my wife Diane passed 2 years ago, cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to gone, I needed something to do with my hands or I was going to come apart. There's something about taking a machine that's been rusting in a field for decades and coaxing it back to life. The smell in there, motor oil, welding flux, old metal warming under work lights, that smell kept me sane through the worst year of my life. Diane worked for the Department of Homeland Security for 12 years. She was methodical, patient, and she had very little tolerance for people who abused whatever small amount of power they'd been handed. She believed that people who did that, who used systems meant to protect others as weapons against them, eventually ran out of runway. I think about that a lot now. She was right about most things. The neighborhood used to be the kind of street where people left their garage doors open on Saturday mornings. Retired teachers, a couple of tradespeople, old Hattie Broom next door, who has lived in Millhaven since before the interstate was built and has an opinion about everything, and the patience of someone who knows exactly when to use it. A younger family down the block with a beagle named Pretzel, who treats every passing squirrel like a federal emergency. It was a good street, quiet, the kind of quiet you don't notice until it's gone. It started going 3 years ago, when Renata Colebrook moved in next door. She arrived in a moving truck she didn't help unload, wearing pressed linen and a sun visor. The kind of sun visor that says I manage things, I don't carry them. She introduced herself to everyone within a week, filed her first noise complaint against me within a month. Power sander. 2 in the afternoon, a Saturday. It was dismissed, so were the next 2. Then she found the HOA, or more accurately, the HOA found her, because Renata Colebrook is exactly the kind of person an HOA beautification committee has been waiting for without knowing it. She joined within 90 days of moving in. By month 6, I was receiving certified letters. That sharp smell of printer toner on official paper. The stiff formality of language designed to make you feel small. The letter informed me that my front garden was in violation of Section 4.2b of Community Aesthetic Standards and required remediation within 30 days. My front garden, the native Virginia wildflowers Diane and I planted together in the last good spring we had. Black-eyed Susans along the fence line, Virginia bluebells near the gate, wild columbine climbing the trellis she picked out. A garden a Virginia Tech horticulturalist would later describe in writing as a curated native habitat. Renata called it a weed lot. What she didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that she hadn't just picked the wrong neighbor. She'd picked the wrong street at exactly the wrong moment, while the wrong people were already paying very close attention. The certified letter was just the opening move. I know that now. At the time, I thought it was a nuisance, the kind of thing you deal with, document, and move on from. I called my attorney, Dex Harrington, who I've known since we served together in the early 90s. He left the Army, went to law school in Charlottesville, and became exactly the kind of property attorney you want in your corner: methodical, unimpressed by bluster, and personally offended by people who weaponize legal systems for petty ends. Dex pulled the original plat survey for 412 Sycamore Bluff Road within 24 hours. What he found was the foundation of everything that came after. My grandfather's deed, filed in 1941, 8 years before the Korean War, 62 years before anyone in Millhaven thought to form an HOA, contained a clause Dex described as a pre-existing use covenant. He explained it to me in one sentence, the way good attorneys do when they want you to actually understand something. Because this property existed before the HOA was established, the HOA has no jurisdiction over it. Not limited jurisdiction. Zero. My grandfather negotiated that clause deliberately, because Elmer Wolfson was a meticulous man who didn't trust committees. I owe that man a serious debt. Turns out, knowing that clause exists, and knowing to look for it in the original deed, not the summary paperwork, is the kind of thing that changes everything. Most people never check. They assume the HOA letter is law. It isn't always. Dex sent a single letter to the HOA board. Polite, brief, devastating. He cited the covenant, noted that any further complaints filed through HOA channels would constitute tortious interference, and wished them a pleasant day. The Beautification Committee's complaint evaporated within 48 hours. I thought that was the end of it. 3 days later, I received a new letter, different letterhead. Not the HOA, the Millhaven Code Enforcement Office. Renata had gone around the HOA entirely and filed directly with the city, claiming my driveway apron encroached on the public right-of-way and that my workshop was a potentially unpermitted structure. I read that letter at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me. Through the window, I could see Renata in her front yard, ostensibly deadheading a potted plant, angled just enough toward my house that she was clearly watching for a reaction. I gave her nothing, finished my coffee, called Dex. Here's what I hadn't understood yet about Renata's approach. And I say approach because that's what it was. Not passion, not genuine grievance, a calculated approach. She wasn't trying to win any single complaint. She was trying to bury me in process. Every complaint, even a dismissed one, costs time and energy. File enough of them, and eventually most people sell and move somewhere quieter. So, I did what any retired surveyor does when his property is questioned. I spent a Saturday walking every inch of it with a tape measure, a notepad, and a thermos of black coffee that had gone lukewarm by the time I finished the back fence line. The workshop permit was exactly where my father left it, a manila folder inside the fireproof box in the hall closet. The paper was brittle at the edges, yellowed like an old paperback, smelling faintly of the cedar closet it had lived in for 40 years. Filed July 14th, 1981. Stamped and signed. Every word legible. I photocopied everything and built a binder. Tabbed, organized, the way a man who spent 20 years producing federal survey documentation builds a binder. Original deed, workshop permit, current survey plat, property photos with timestamps. The kind of binder that says, "Go ahead, send your inspector." Dex delivered a copy to code enforcement 2 days before the scheduled inspection. The city inspector, a tired-looking man named Clifton Pruitt, who had clearly done this enough times to be surprised by nothing, spent 45 minutes on my property on a Wednesday morning, checked the driveway apron against the plat, examined the workshop permit, walked the fence line without a word. His written report was 4 sentences. The last one, "No violations noted. Complaint appears to be without factual basis." Renata watched from her porch the entire time. When Clifton drove away without issuing a single citation, I raised my coffee thermos toward her from the workshop doorway. She didn't wave back. I should have known then that a woman like Renata doesn't absorb a loss. She converts it. Before that evening was over, she had called in a favor with someone on Millhaven's Beautification Committee. By the next morning, an emergency public hearing had been scheduled about my garden, Diane's garden, the one with the black-eyed Susans still blooming along the fence like they were still trying to take care of the place she loved. The Millhaven Beautification Committee meets in a beige conference room at Town Hall that smells permanently of old carpet and coffee from a machine that's been there since the Clinton administration. 12 plastic chairs, a folding table, 4 committee members who treat a neighborhood aesthetics ordinance like it's constitutional law. Renata recused herself from the panel with theatrical reluctance. Hands raised, small apologetic smile, the performance of a woman who absolutely did not engineer the entire proceeding. Then she sat directly behind the committee, where she could whisper suggestions to the chair, like a theater director working the wings. I showed up in my cleanest flannel shirt with my binder, and Dex Harrington in a blazer that's seen better days, but carries the quiet authority of someone who doesn't need to try hard. Renata's presentation was slick, color-printed photographs of my wildflower garden, taken with a zoom lens, I noticed, from angles designed to make curated native plantings look like neglect. She cited a 1993 municipal ordinance about unmaintained vegetation adjacent to roadways, and she'd brought a witness, a retired accountant named Foster Crane, who lived 3 blocks away and, as far as I could tell, had never once been on my street, let alone seen my garden in person. He testified with great confidence that it was an eyesore, depressing property values throughout the area. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Someone's chair scraped the tile floor every few minutes. Renata's perfume, something aggressively floral, which felt appropriate, filled the front third of the room. I wrote the word theatrical in the margin of my notepad and underlined it twice. Then Dex stood up. His counter-presentation took 11 minutes. He did 3 things in order, without raising his voice once. First, he presented a signed letter from Dr. Loretta Finch, a Virginia Tech Extension horticulturalist, certifying that my garden was a deliberately curated native plant habitat, listing all 23 species by both common and Latin names, because Dex doesn't do anything halfway. The letter noted that native plant gardens of this type are explicitly protected under Virginia state law, a statute most people have never heard of, but one that makes perfect sense when you understand it. The Commonwealth of Virginia, like many states, has passed legislation protecting native landscaping from municipal aesthetic ordinances when the plantings serve documented ecological purposes. The logic being that a garden full of black-eyed Susans and wild columbine is doing more for the local watershed than a lawn of Kentucky bluegrass ever will. Knowing that law exists, and knowing to cite it, turned a 30-day remediation order into a dismissed complaint in under an hour. Second, Dex noted calmly that Foster Crane's property was 3 blocks from mine, on a different street, making his testimony about property value impact legally without standing. Foster Crane shifted in his chair and stopped making eye contact with anyone. Third, and this was the part I enjoyed most, Dex pointed out that Renata's photographs had been taken from inside my property line, not from the public sidewalk, which meant she had trespassed to obtain her own evidence. He didn't demand action on it. He just put it on the table, let it sit there, and moved on, like a man who keeps receipts and knows exactly when to show them. The committee chair called a 15-minute recess. When they returned, they voted 3-1 to table the resolution pending further legal review. The one dissenting vote came from the woman who'd spent the entire meeting texting under the table. Outside in the parking lot, Dex said, "She's going to come back harder." I said, "I know." He looked at me. "You sure you want to keep engaging? Some people, the smartest thing is to document and wait." I thought about Diane, about the 14 months, about how she never once waited for anything to resolve itself when she could do something about it instead. "Let her come," I said. We drove away. Renata sat in her car for 20 minutes before pulling out. I know because Hattie Broom was walking her dog past the town hall parking lot and texted me a commentary I will not repeat in full, but which contained the phrase, "just sitting there stewing like a pot of bad soup." Hattie has a gift. But Dex was right. Renata didn't absorb this loss either. Within a week, a Facebook group appeared. Concerned Sycamore Bluff residents. 34 members, most of whom I'd never met. Posts began appearing, photographs of my workshop taken from the street, vague references to safety concerns, murmurs about noise and fumes, and what exactly was going on over at 412. None of it was specific enough to be actionable. All of it was designed to do one thing: make me feel like the problem on my own street. That particular kind of pressure doesn't come with a legal remedy. It just accumulates, slow and grinding, like water working at old stone. Most people, eventually, move. I'd lived on this street for 30 years. My grandfather bought this land before my father was born. I wasn't going anywhere. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being made to feel like a stranger on your own street. Not the exhaustion of physical work. I know that kind, and honestly, I prefer it. This was something else. Waking up and knowing that somewhere, on a phone or a laptop, someone was crafting the next version of the story where I was the problem. Where my workshop was a hazard, my garden was a blight, my presence on a street my family had anchored for 80 years was somehow up for community debate. I didn't post anything, didn't respond to the Facebook group, didn't knock on doors to defend myself, partly because Dex advised against it, partly because I'd learned in the Army that the man who stays quiet while the other side overextends themselves usually ends up with more options, not fewer. But mostly, I stayed quiet because my daughter Blythe came up from Richmond that Friday evening and reminded me, without meaning to, that I wasn't actually alone in this. Blythe is 31. She works in federal procurement, the kind of job that sounds boring at dinner parties, but means she spends her days reading contracts the way other people read novels, looking for the line that changes everything. She has her mother's patience and, I've come to realize, her mother's instinct for when something isn't what it appears to be. She sat across from me on the porch while I told her the whole sequence: the HOA letter, the code complaints, the public hearing, the Facebook group. The September air was cooling fast, the way Virginia evenings do when summer finally decides it's finished. Somewhere down the block, Pretzel was barking at something that probably didn't exist. When I finished, Blythe was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Has anyone ever actually bought a property near her before? Like, after one of these complaint campaigns?" I told her I didn't know. I hadn't thought to look. She pulled out her laptop right there on the porch. I went inside to make coffee. Dark roast from Ironwood Grounds, the local shop I buy by the pound because life is too short for bad coffee. And when I came back out 15 minutes later, the look on her face had changed. "Dad," she said, "this isn't a neighbor dispute." She turned the laptop toward me. Public property records, Virginia Business Registry, deed transfer histories, all of it open in separate tabs, the way she works, methodical and thorough, and slightly terrifying. In Renata's previous neighborhood in Roanoke, 2 properties had sold under duress within 18 months of her arrival. Both sales were preceded by extended code complaint campaigns. Both properties were purchased by the same LLC, Sycamore Partners LLC, at prices noticeably below market value. Blythe ran the LLC registration. The registered agent was a man named Thaddeus R. Colebrook, Renata's ex-husband. They divorced in 2019 but remained, as far as the public filings showed, active business partners. The LLC had acquired 6 properties across 4 Virginia counties over 7 years. Every single acquisition followed the same pattern: a new neighbor with a clipboard, a campaign of complaints, a property that eventually cracked under the pressure and sold cheap. I sat with that for a long moment. The coffee was hot in my hands. Down the street, Pretzel had stopped barking. Everything was very quiet. "She's been running this scheme for 7 years, I said. "At least," Blythe said. This wasn't someone who had moved in next door and developed a grudge. This was someone who had moved in next door because of what the property could become once I was gone. Every complaint, every letter, every whisper campaign, it wasn't petty. It was professional. I was a line item in someone's business model. The retired school teacher 2 streets over who'd sold 18 months ago. The young couple on Birchwood Lane who'd moved away quietly after months of pressure. I'd assumed they'd just grown tired, the way people do. It hadn't occurred to me that someone had been deliberately manufacturing that tiredness. Blythe printed everything, put it in a folder, and drove it to Dex's office in Charlottesville the next morning. Dex read it in one sitting. Then he called a colleague at the Virginia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. The AG's office was interested, very interested. They asked us to hold what we knew, stay quiet, and let the process work. I was good at staying quiet. What I didn't tell Blythe that night, what I'd almost forgotten in the grind of the past few months, was the phone call I'd received 6 weeks earlier from a man named Briggs about my workshop, about why, starting next week, there were going to be some very particular people on my property. and why Renata Colebrook, if she kept pushing, was about to walk directly into the middle of a federal investigation she didn't know existed, into herself. Let me tell you about Briggs. 6 weeks before Blythe sat on my porch with a laptop full of property records, I'd received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was calm, unhurried, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has never once needed to fill a silence. He introduced himself as Briggs, said he'd worked with Diane at DHS before moving to a different division. He didn't specify which one, and I'd learned years ago that when people like Briggs don't specify, you don't ask. He said Diane had spoken highly of me, of the property, of the workshop. He said his team needed a staging location in Central Virginia for a 2-week operational exercise. Discreet, residential feel, corner lot with good sight lines and a working workshop. Government rate, full discretion, 2 weeks. I said yes without much deliberation, partly because Briggs had known Diane, and that still means something to me. Partly because the rate covered 4 months of property taxes, but mostly because there was something about the way he described needing a place that felt, I don't know how to explain this exactly, like the house still had work to do, like it wasn't finished being useful yet. He asked me not to mention it to the neighbors. Standard operational protocol, he said. I told him that wouldn't be a problem. I'm not a man who discusses his business at the mailbox. What Briggs didn't tell me, what I wouldn't understand until much later, was the specific nature of the work his team was conducting in Virginia. Secret Service Financial Crimes Division. Most people don't know that the Secret Service does anything beyond protecting the president. That's understandable. It's the part that makes the news. But financial crimes have been under their jurisdiction since the agency was founded in 1865, originally to combat counterfeit currency. Today, that mandate includes wire fraud, deed fraud, and coordinated real estate schemes that cross state lines or involve federal financial instruments. A scheme, for instance, involving an LLC systematically targeting properties across multiple Virginia counties through coordinated harassment campaigns, then acquiring them below market value and flipping them for profit. I didn't know that's what Briggs was investigating when I shook his hand. Briggs, I would later come to understand, had a very good idea of what was happening on my street before he ever pulled into my driveway. He hadn't chosen my property randomly. A corner lot in Millhaven, a workshop, good sight lines. Those were real requirements, but there were other properties that met those requirements. Mine had something the others didn't. A connection to Diane, yes, but also proximity to a subject his team had been building a case around for the better part of 2 years. Renata Colebrook wasn't just my problem. She was their case. I poured 2 cups of coffee the morning Briggs arrived, dark roast, the good stuff, and handed him one in the workshop doorway while his team unloaded equipment from a plain cargo van. He looked at the 1950 John Deere Model B on the lift, half restored, grease on every surface. Your wife mentioned you did this, he said. She talked about the tractor? She talked about you, he said. Said you were the kind of man who fixes things other people give up on. He went back to work. I stood there for a moment, with my coffee going warm in my hands, listening to the sound of his team moving through my father's workshop. Diane was right about most things. That Sunday evening, my kitchen table disappeared under documents, plat surveys, printed property records, Blythe's folder, Dex's notes, 2 legal pads I'd filled over the past week, and a pot of dark roast from Ironwood Grounds going on the counter, because this was the kind of night that required serious coffee. The overhead light was on. The house was quiet. Outside, the September wind was moving through Diane's rose bushes along the side gate, that soft rustling sound that I still haven't gotten used to hearing without her in the next room. I'm not an angry man. Anger, I learned in the Army, is expensive. It costs more than it returns, and it clouds the decisions that matter. But I was done absorbing, done waiting, done being the patient man at the end of the street while someone ran a 7-year fraud operation through my family's front yard. I mapped out 3 tracks, not a plan for revenge. I want to be clear about that. A plan for completion. The first track was the legal flank, and that one belonged to Dex. The AG referral was already moving. That was the long game, the one that would take months and end in a conference room somewhere, with lawyers and consent decrees. But there was a shorter game available right now, and Dex filed for it the following Monday morning. A temporary restraining order against Renata Colebrook, citing documented trespass from the driveway incident, tortious interference from the false code complaints, and defamation from the Facebook posts containing statements she knew to be false. Most people hear restraining order and think it takes months. It doesn't have to. What Dex explained to me, and what I hadn't known before all of this, is that a temporary restraining order can be granted within days when you can show a judge that ongoing harm is actively occurring. You don't need a full trial. You need documentation, timestamps, and a clear pattern. That's exactly what my binder was built for. I set up a single Wi-Fi security camera on the front porch, visible, clearly mounted, with a notice sign posted at the property line the way Virginia law requires. Then I started a daily log. Date, time, incident, witnesses. The kind of log that transforms a pattern of harassment into a legal record. The second track was the community flank, and that one I built one conversation at a time. Over a week of ordinary interactions, at the mailbox, on morning walks, across back fences, I quietly identified 6 households willing to provide written statements about Renata's behavior. The whisper campaign, the Facebook posts, the pattern of complaints. Nobody was angry exactly. They were tired, the way neighbors get when someone has been slowly poisoning the atmosphere of a street they'd chosen to live on. Hattie Broom didn't just offer a written statement. She showed up at my fence one afternoon with a lawn chair under one arm and her thermos of sweet tea in the other hand, planted the chair just inside the property line facing the street, and announced that she would be available as a visible witness whenever needed. "I've been watching that woman for 2 years," she said, settling in like she was claiming territory. "I have been waiting for something to do about it. Hattie is 72 years old, has lived in Millhaven her entire life, and has the particular energy of someone who has been patient for a very long time and is deeply relieved to finally have a productive outlet for it." I brought her a cup of coffee. We didn't say much else. We didn't need to. The third track was the one I discussed only with Briggs, in the workshop, with the door closed. I didn't ask him to do anything. That needs to be said plainly. I didn't ask him to intervene, to confront Renata, to use his presence on my property as leverage of any kind. What I did do was tell him the full picture, the complaints, the LLC, the AG referral, the Facebook campaign, because he was operating out of my workshop and he had a right to know what was happening around his staging location. Briggs listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She doesn't know we're here." "No," I said, "and you haven't told her. You asked me not to discuss it with the neighbors." He nodded slowly. Outside, through the workshop's small high window, I could see the black-eyed Susans moving in the wind along the fence line. Briggs looked at the John Deere on the lift, almost finished now, just the final calibration work left. "How much longer on the tractor?" he asked. "Few days," I said. "We're on site through Friday," he said. "Full team Thursday and Friday for the after-action review." He picked up his coffee. I picked up my wrench. Neither of us said another word about it. We didn't need to. Renata found out about the TRO application on a Thursday. I don't know exactly how. Dex suspected a contact inside the county clerk's office, someone who received Christmas cards and occasionally mentioned things she probably shouldn't. However it happened, by Thursday afternoon, Renata knew a restraining order had been filed against her, and by Thursday evening, her silver SUV was sitting in her driveway with the engine running for 40 minutes. I know because Hattie texted me. "Car running next door. She's on the phone. This is not a happy phone call." 2 days later, a man I'd never seen knocked on my front door. Middle-aged, soft shoes, the kind of handshake that's slightly too firm, like it was practiced. He introduced himself as a property consultant, representing a development interest that had, he said, heard the property at 412 Sycamore Bluff might be coming available. His clients were prepared to make a generous offer. He named a number 17% below current market value, and framed it, with a straight face, as doing me a favor given the ongoing community concerns about the property. I invited him in, offered coffee, listened to the entire pitch without interrupting. Then I asked for a business card. He produced one from his breast pocket with the smooth efficiency of a man who hands these out often. Thaddeus R. Colebrook, Strategic Property Consultants LLC. I photographed it with my phone, timestamp visible in the frame, thanked him warmly for his time, and closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a moment looking at the photo on my screen. Thad Colebrook, Renata's ex-husband, the registered agent of the LLC that had acquired 6 properties through harassment campaigns across 4 Virginia counties, standing in my hallway, handing me a business card. The audacity of it was almost architectural, almost something you had to admire, the way you admire a building that shouldn't be standing. I texted the photo to Dex with one word: bingo. Dex called the AG contact within the hour. This time, she didn't say give us time. She said, don't let him leave town. Thad had already left town, as it turned out, but the business card hadn't, and a personal visit to a target property constitutes direct evidence of intent in a way that LLC filings alone don't. Thad Colebrook had just walked himself into the frame. But Renata wasn't finished. Cornered people rarely are. They just start swinging at things they can't afford to break. That weekend, she made the move that Dex later described as the single greatest gift she could have given us. She went to Millhaven's main public Facebook group, 4,200 members, the whole town effectively, and posted a lengthy statement claiming that 412 Sycamore Bluff was being used for unauthorized commercial activity, possibly involving government contract fraud, and that she had been personally forced to fear for her safety by the intimidating individuals coming and going from the property. She didn't name me directly. She included the address. For approximately 4 hours, the post generated concerned comments from people who didn't know the full story. Then 3 things happened in sequence, and they happened fast. Maureen Taktuk, retired school teacher, 40 years in Millhaven, the kind of woman whose word carries weight precisely because she never wastes it, posted a detailed timeline of Renata's complaint history with dates and case numbers she'd quietly been collecting for months. Hattie Broom posted the 6 signed neighbor statements as a photo album, each one witnessed and dated. And Dex, who monitors these situations with the attentiveness of a man who bills by the hour, served Renata a formal cease and desist for defamation, electronically at 11:47 p.m. Renata deleted the post before midnight, but screenshots, as anyone who has ever made a mistake on the internet knows, are forever. 3 separate neighbors had already saved them. Through all of it, the business card visit, the public post, the cease and desist, I didn't post a single word online. Didn't make statements beyond what neighbors asked me directly. Went to the workshop every morning. Worked on the tractor. Drank my coffee. Hattie stopped by one afternoon while I was adjusting the carburetor and asked, through the open workshop door, whether I was nervous. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. I'm ready. She nodded. Settled into her lawn chair, with her thermos of sweet tea, I could smell it from the doorway, thick with sugar and lemon, and faced the street like a woman who bought her ticket months ago and intends to enjoy every minute of the show. The TRO hearing was 9 days away. Renata had received the cease and desist. Thad wasn't returning her calls with any urgency. I learned this later from the AG investigation records, which documented their communications in the kind of clinical detail that makes human desperation look almost poetic. She had played every card in her established sequence, and every one had been blocked or turned back against her. She had one move left. The kind of move that people make when they've stopped calculating and started reacting. On a Tuesday night at 11 p.m., my front porch security camera sent an alert to my phone. I watched the footage in bed, half awake, and came fully awake very quickly. A figure in dark clothing walking up my driveway, moving to the side of the house, reaching for the outdoor hose spigot connected to the foundation garden, the garden Diane and I planted together, and opening it fully. If left running through the night, that spigot would saturate the garden bed, work water into the crawl space beneath the porch, and potentially damage the foundation joists my father sistered back in 1989. It would look like a plumbing issue, the kind of thing that costs thousands to fix, and, depending on the insurance situation, might take months to resolve. The figure noticed the camera after approximately 40 seconds, and backed away quickly toward the street. Not quickly enough. The camera caught a clean profile shot under the motion-activated light. Clear, well-lit, unambiguous. The figure was wearing a sun visor. At 11 p.m., in the dark. The sun visor. I've thought about that detail many times since. There's something almost Shakespearean about it. The one piece of signature costuming, worn so habitually it became invisible to the person wearing it. Renata had been so defined by that visor for so long that she forgot it was a visor. She just forgot to take it off. I closed the spigot at 11:03, Called Dex at 11:09. By midnight, there was a police report with the footage attached. Incident number, timestamp, the works. Criminal mischief. Potentially more, given that the property was currently hosting a federal operational presence, a detail I passed to Briggs the following morning. Briggs watched the footage once on my tablet in the workshop. He didn't say much. He made a single phone call, brief, mostly listening from his end, then put his phone away. He looked at me. "The after-action review is Thursday and Friday," he said. "Full team on site both days." I nodded. "Standard protocol," he said, "is a complete property walk during the review. All personnel, full perimeter." "Understood," I said. Neither of us said anything else about it. He picked up his coffee. I picked up a wrench. The John Deere was one afternoon of work away from finished. I could feel it the way you feel the last mile of a long drive, that particular mix of satisfaction and something almost like grief that the thing you've been working toward is nearly done. Meanwhile, the legal machinery Dex had been building was accelerating on its own. Wednesday morning, 2 calls back to back. First, the TRO hearing had been moved up. A judge had an opening Thursday afternoon due to a settlement in another case. Second, the Virginia Attorney General's office had issued a civil investigative demand to Sycamore Partners LLC and to Renata Colebrook personally, requiring production of all records related to property acquisition activities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. A civil investigative demand is not an arrest. It's not even a charge, but it is the legal equivalent of someone placing a hand on your shoulder in a quiet room and saying, without raising their voice, "We see you. We have seen you for a while, and we are now writing things down." Renata received her copy Thursday morning at 9:14 a.m., per delivery confirmation. The TRO hearing was Thursday at 2 p.m. I didn't go. Dex handled it. He told me later that Renata arrived with an attorney she'd clearly retained in the last 72 hours. A real estate specialist named Grover Pinch, who was competent but visibly working without the preparation time he would have preferred. The judge, a woman named Honorable Harriet Waxby, who had the energy of someone who has presided over enough nonsense to last several lifetimes, granted the TRO in 23 minutes. Renata Colebrook was legally prohibited from entering my property, contacting my neighbors about me, or filing any code complaints against 412 Sycamore Bluff, without prior judicial approval. I was in the workshop when Dex called to tell me. I had the last bolt in my hand, the final piece of the John Deere restoration, 8 months of work coming down to 1/4 turn. I set the phone down, put the bolt in, picked up the key. The 1950 John Deere Model B turned over on the first try, a sound somewhere between a cough and a roar, filling the workshop, filling the whole street probably, rattling the small high window above the lift. 8 months of evenings and weekends and grief, worked out through grease and steel, and she ran. I sat in that sound for a long moment. Then I cut the engine and waited for Friday. Friday morning arrived the way the best days do, quietly, without ceremony. The sky over Sycamore Bluff Road going from gray to pale gold, while the street was still asleep. By 9 a.m., 2 black SUVs with federal government plates were parked in my driveway. Briggs and his team, 4 people in total, all in plain clothes that communicated something without quite saying it. The way a locked door communicates something. We're moving through the property for the after-action review. Clipboards, quiet conversations, the methodical efficiency of people who do serious work and don't need anyone to notice. Hattie Broom was in her lawn chair by 9:15, thermos in hand, positioned at the fence line with the focused energy of someone who has been waiting for this specific Friday for months. She dressed for it, good cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the whole ensemble. Maureen Taktuk was on her porch across the street, ostensibly tending to a window box that hadn't needed tending in weeks. 3 other neighbors had independently discovered reasons to be outside on a Friday morning. And in the workshop doorway, facing outward into the September light, sat the restored 1950 John Deere Model B, green and gleaming. 8 months of work. I'd parked it there that morning because it was my property, and I was proud of it, and because Diane would have laughed at the sight of it, this beautiful, ridiculous, fully operational antique tractor standing guard like it owned the place, which, in a sense, it did. At 11:17 a.m., Renata Colebrook's silver SUV turned onto Sycamore Bluff Road. She was technically within her rights to drive down a public street, What she was not within her rights to do, per the TRO granted 18 hours earlier, was stop, get out, walk to the edge of the sidewalk in front of my property, pull out her phone. She did all four. I watched from the porch. Briggs's team continued their review, unhurried. Hattie Broom sat up slightly straighter in her lawn chair. Renata began filming and narrating, loudly, for an audience that existed primarily in her imagination, about unauthorized federal use of a residential property and the rights of concerned community members and her personal experience of feeling unsafe. She had the practiced cadence of someone who had made these kinds of public performances before. She believed, I think, that the men near the SUVs were contractors or consultants or something ordinary and embarrassable. She believed a scene would cause them to leave. Two of Briggs's team stepped off the porch and walked to the property line. They didn't cross it. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't do anything that could be described as threatening. One of them, a woman in a gray jacket with the particular stillness that doesn't come from yoga, held up a credential wallet, gold badge, photo ID. 3 letters Renata could read from 8 feet away. Renata stopped talking. The phone stayed up, but nothing came out. Her mouth was open. The words had simply stopped arriving, the way words do when the brain receives information that doesn't fit any prepared response. Briggs appeared in the workshop doorway, behind the tractor, which made the whole image almost compositionally perfect, holding a clipboard, looking at Renata the way a man looks at something that has interrupted his workday. "Ma'am," he said, "are you the individual who has been filing harassment complaints against this property?" This is a public, I have every right to. This is an active federal operational site," he said. "Any footage of personnel or equipment taken from this location is subject to federal review. I'd ask you to lower the phone." She lowered the phone. From her lawn chair, in a voice of profound satisfaction, Hattie Broom said, Maureen Taktuk had stopped pretending to garden. The neighbors who'd found reasons to be outside were no longer pretending to have other reasons. I walked off the porch, crossed the yard to the fence line. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just stood on my grandfather's concrete, in my father's yard, in front of my late wife's rose bushes, and looked at Renata Colebrook. That's when Dex's car pulled up behind her SUV. He got out with a manila envelope and walked to the sidewalk with the unhurried energy of a man who has absolutely already won. He handed it to Renata with professional courtesy. Inside, the granted TRO, the AG Civil Investigative Demand, a formal notice of civil claims for trespass, tortious interference, and defamation. Renata stood on the public sidewalk holding the envelope. The agents had returned to their work. The tractor gleamed in the workshop doorway. The neighbors watched. Dex said, "You've been served, Ms. Colebrook. Have a good day." She got in her car. She drove away. Down the block, Pretzel started barking. At what? Nobody knew, because Pretzel never knows. But it felt exactly right, like the street itself exhaling. Hattie raised her thermos. I raised mine back. 6 weeks after Renata drove away from Sycamore Bluff Road with an envelope full of consequences, the Virginia Attorney General's office announced a formal civil investigation into Sycamore Partners LLC and its affiliated entities. The investigation uncovered 7 properties across 4 Virginia counties, acquired through what investigators described in their formal findings as coordinated regulatory harassment targeting long-term property owners. 3 of the displaced families were located. Their stories were added to the record. Their voices, which had been quietly extinguished by a campaign designed to make them feel like problems on their own streets, were put back into the official account of what had happened to them. Renata accepted a consent decree, restitution, a 10-year bar on HOA or municipal board participation anywhere in Virginia. The LLC was dissolved. Thad Colebrook, who had handed me his business card in my own hallway, with the confidence of a man who had never once been caught, paid a civil penalty that Dex described only as significant, with a small smile that told me everything I needed to know. Renata sold her house 5 months after the driveway confrontation. The new neighbors, a retired firefighter and his husband, who introduced themselves with a peach pie and a very relaxed energy, moved in on a Tuesday in February. Hattie Broom adopted them within 48 hours. She brought cookies. She has opinions about their landscaping already, but the good kind. The civil suit settled. The terms are sealed, but the legal fees are covered. And the binder, all those tabs, All those photocopied permits and survey plats and time-stamped photographs went back into the fireproof box in the hall closet, next to Elmer Wolfson's original deed and my father's workshop permit from July 14th, 1981. I drove the restored John Deere Model B in Millhaven's Founders Day Parade in October. Fire engine green, fully operational, pulling a flatbed with a hand-painted banner that read, "Wolfson Family, Millhaven since 1941. The crowd, mostly people who knew the story by then, a few who didn't but applauded anyway, because a beautiful old tractor is its own argument, lined both sides of Main Street. Hattie rode on the flatbed. She waved like she was accepting an award, which, in a sense, she was. She had earned it. But here's the part that stays with me most. I took a portion of the settlement, I won't say how much, and worked with Dex to establish a small fund through the Millhaven Community Foundation. We called it the Diane Wolfson Property Rights Education Fund. It provides free legal consultations through a rotating panel of pro bono attorneys for any Millhaven resident facing code enforcement complaints, HOA disputes, or pressure from predatory development interests. In its first year, the fund served 23 families. 3 of them avoided displacement entirely, and 1, a young couple on the east side of town who'd been receiving the same sequence of complaints, the same kind of below-market purchase offers, the same slow, grinding pressure, got to stay in the house where they were planning to raise their first child. Dex called to tell me about that last one. I was in the workshop when the phone rang. The tractor was back on the lift, a different project this time. A 1948 Ford 8N somebody brought me from a farm auction in Stanton, rusted solid, completely seized. The kind of thing that looks finished until you decide it isn't. I stood there for a moment after the call ended, in the smell of oil and metal and the dark roast going cold on the workbench, and I thought about Diane, about patience, about what she used to say, that people who abuse small power eventually run out of runway, that systems, imperfect as they are, have a way of catching up. She was right. She usually was.